Warwick Castle. Born in the storm of the Norman invasion, its history is etched in steel and blood. This magnificent citadel was home to 3 chivalrous knights. 2 would battle their way to England's throne. Relive the fighting past of the world's finest standing medieval stronghold. Next on Great Castles of Europe. England, 1066. A flotilla of Norman warships bears down on the Sussex coast. On board, 8,000 invaders steel themselves for battle, led by William, Duke of Normandy. Torn down and stowed inside their Viking-style ships is the decisive military weapon of its age. William will order it erected upon his army's landing in England, a simple castle consisting of a tower and courtyard. As the Duke's armies drive north against the Saxon king Harold II, they subdue the countryside with dozens of these simple forts. Canterbury, Rochester, London, Windsor. By 1068, castles marked the conqueror's path to victory and changed the English landscape forever. One castle in the nation's heartland evolved into the towering epitome of defensive architecture, Warwick Castle. With its back thrust majestically against the Avon River, Warwick resembles a gladiator in repose, confidently welcoming all comers. It dominates a landscape of rolling meadows and woodland, truly majestic in its beauty. Nature herself contributed to the castle's defenses. In the west, this sandstone bluff was the site of Warwick's original stockade and tower. The Avon provides power for the mill and a permanent barrier against aggressors from the south. William the Conqueror wouldn't recognize Warwick's contemporary face. For 7 centuries, the battling giant evolved to withstand improved weapons and tactics. This is the wooden fortress William the Conqueror erected in 1068, using local lumber. Within 2 centuries, stone replaced wood and a high wall surrounded the keep. Mighty twin towers rose in the east, protecting the gatehouse and its massive drawbridge. By the 16th century, improved artillery called for thicker walls and generally increased girth. During the English Civil War, apartments in the south housed royalty who were loyal to Parliament. Meanwhile, royalists lay siege to the ramparts outside. By then, the fighting castle hosted an army of defenders and provisions for months of battle. And with cannon ports and towers of its own, Warwick could trade blows with even the best armed foe. Using castles like Warwick, William the Conqueror tamed battling factions of the British Isles. He then held them together with a tightly ordered system of feudalism, which bound vassals to regional lords and lords to their king. William's network of castles was the backbone of his power structure, but its heart was knighthood. Knights were mounted warriors who provided lords with military service in exchange for land. The brotherhood was bound by the code of chivalry, which called for courtesy towards women, loyalty to God, and military virtue. Like the memories of an old crusader, relics from 1,000 campaigns adorn Warwick's halls. The castle's largest room is the Great Hall, where the Earls of Warwick administered their vast holdings and held councils of war. A bear and staff have marked their coat of arms since the time of Arthgillis, a knight of King Arthur's Round Table. The bear embraces an uprooted tree, allegedly used by an ancient Earl of Warwick to slay a giant. These gleaming suits of armor come from Germany and Italy, as well as the British Isles. The 11th century Norman invasion hastened the development of armor in England. Throughout the medieval age, the parts of the suit were called by their original French names. Warwick contains 1,000 pieces of arms and armor. Virtually every lance, sword, and shield here played some part in charting England's course. The owners of this equipment include giants of English history, like Lord Oliver Cromwell and Charles Edward Stuart, known as Bonnie Prince Charlie. But no lord or pretender can evoke the spirit of romantic knighthood like the legendary hero Sir Guy of Warwick. Guy began as a page in the service of an Earl of Warwick. He was low-born and unworthy to court Felice, the Earl's daughter. Yet Felice captured his heart. So Guy set out to make a name for himself in the surrounding lands of Warwickshire. Like many knights, Guy competed valiantly in festival tournaments, contests in which knights honed their martial skills. These tournaments were organized and hosted by regional lords. In tournament competition, their knights could bring honor to their houses and earn money for themselves. Typically, the winner of jousting competitions could claim the horse and weaponry of those he defeated. Often he could demand a ransom of the vanquished as well. Professional knights like Guy traveled from one tournament to another throughout England and the continent, earning glory and a small fortune. Competing in tournaments was also a good way to catch the eye of the ladies of the court. Sometimes it was a good way to get killed. The weapons were never blunted. Many noblemen lost their lives. Guy, however, prevailed and proved to be England's mightiest warrior. He turned his attention to ridding Warwickshire of the cutthroats and thieves that plagued the Earl of Warwick's domain. Next, Guy wielded his mighty sword against monsters that terrorized the local peasants. This statue at Warwick shows Guy doing battle with the most fearsome of these creatures, the demonic Dun Cow of Dunchurch. Time Guy slew this beast, his chronicles of valor far outweighed the lowly station to which he was born. When he asked for Felice's hand, she consented to be his bride. When Felice's father died, Guy was dubbed Earl of Warwick. This enormous cauldron is called Guy's porridge pot. Legend suggests it was used to make prodigious meals for Warwick's new earl. However, settled life didn't suit the adventurous knight. Raising his own army, he set sail for Jerusalem to rescue the Holy Land from heathen invaders. His crusade lasted more than a decade. By the time Guy returned to Warwick, he was a tired, broken man. Years of killing had blunted his appetite for life. He resolved to be a knight no more. Donning beggar's rags, Guy went to live in the cave of a monk, not far from Warwick. There he began a life of prayer. The beautiful Felice knew nothing of Guy's return or his vows of poverty and repentance. At Warwick, she waited year after year, unaware that he languished just a few miles away. Once, to lay eyes on his beloved again, Sir Guy appeared at the castle gate and received alms from his lady. Felice failed to recognize him. Guy decided never to return. But on the day he knew his death would come, the Earl of Warwick summoned his wife with a letter. In it, he enclosed his wedding ring as proof of his identity. Felice was overcome. She rushed to the cave. Sir Guy of Warwick died in her arms. Though Sir Guy exists mostly in legend, his adventures have blended over the centuries with the stories of several of Warwick's real-life earls. Many of these heroic figures are entombed in nearby St. Mary's Chapel. This is an effigy of Ambrose Dudley, both the son and brother of Earls of Warwick. This is Richard Beauchamp, 13th Earl of Warwick, one of 5 earls from the Beauchamp family. Richard, who designed and endowed St. Mary's Chapel, was a friend to Henry V and a gallant warrior. Few could match his skill with a sword and lance. Like Sir Guy, he was known to have visited the Holy Lands. Near the end of his life, he presided over Joan of Arc's trial and execution. By the time Richard Beauchamp's line died out in 1446, William the Conqueror's plans for England were in motion. His feudal system of castle-dwelling lords had pulled the nation together, protecting it from foreign invasion. In relative peace, England began to catch up to the continent in government, religion, and the arts. As always, Warwick's earls took a leading role in the nation's ongoing drama. When the 30-year War of the Roses broke out between rivals for England's crown, Warwick Castle was in the thick of it. The houses of York and Lancaster both laid claim to the throne. Their badges were the white and red rose, respectively, giving their bloody contest its name. Into this maelstrom was born Richard of the House of York. His single-minded pursuit of the throne was immortalized, with dramatic license, in Shakespeare's history, Richard III. Richard, portrayed here beneath his badge, remains England's most controversial king. As Shakespeare tells it, Richard came upon his crown through violence and deception. After the death of his brother, the king, he hides his 2 nephews in the infamous Tower of London, ostensibly for their own protection. Like Warwick, the tower was founded by William the Conqueror. Both of the imprisoned boys are in line for the throne ahead of Richard, and hence not long for this world, poisoned by their villainous uncle. History is less certain about the fate of the 13-year-old King Edward V and his brother, remembered as the 2 princes of the tower. But history does record that by 1483, Richard III was King of England, all other claimants dispatched one way or another. The new king often retreated from treacherous London to the safe embrace of mighty Warwick Castle. Accompanying him at all times was his own personal guard, who occupied Warwick and made camp in the surrounding lands of Warwickshire. This precaution was necessary, for Richard had many enemies. Of course, the House of Lancaster wanted his head, but so did his former supporters. Not even his own army could be entirely trusted. The people of Warwickshire, too, would have received Richard's arrival with misgivings. The last Earl of Warwick had died fighting Richard at the Battle of Barnet, by one account impaled on Richard's lance. Later, Richard had strengthened his hold on the dead Earl's lands and peasantry by marrying his eldest daughter, Anne Neville. Political maneuverings of this sort add to a portrait of a king whose journey to the throne was steeped in controversy. The defensive features of Warwick came to reflect the strength of the enemies Richard made along the way. Approaching armies could be spotted by lookouts high atop the two defending towers. Here on Caesar's Tower, archers could pick off attackers from these gaps called embrasures. Arrow slits offered even more protection. Defenders also fired through crosses cut in the merlots. Richard added this defensive perch called a crow's nest. Warwick's mighty gatehouse was almost impossible to break through. In fact, throughout medieval times, the castle was virtually impervious to capture. Yet a number of antagonists were willing to try. Within Warwick's ramparts, Richard was safe from his enemies' armies. Yet his own garrison was infested with spies. The castle provided several means for dealing with them. This door, called a sallyport, gets its name from its usefulness in reconnoitering an enemy's position. From here, a friendly lookout could sally forth. It was also useful for getting rid of unwelcome guests.
Come on! That's enough! In!
Almost any fate was better than ending up here, in Warwick's dungeon, the final destination for many prisoners. Some were held for ransom or persuaded to reveal strategic secrets. The dank, vaulted chamber contains a grisly assortment of torture instruments, including a Roman rack and a horrible device called the Scavenger's Daughter. Perhaps the worst fate was being sealed up for good in the oubliette, in French, place to be forgotten. On August 7th, 1485, Richard's reign drew to a close. The army of Henry Tudor, the Lancastrian claimant to the throne, landed in Wales. They numbered just 2,000 men. But on the march from central Wales to Shrewsbury, which took 2 weeks, they drew additional forces from the ranks of Lancaster loyalists. Henry had alerted them far in advance. Upon their arrival at Sutton Cheney in western Leicestershire, Henry Tudor's army was 5,000 strong. The invasion had not caught Richard unawares. On the 21st of August, assured of victory, his army of 12,000 gathered at Leicester. A third army, controlled by Lord Thomas and Sir William Stanley, watched what proceeded at a distance. The Stanleys favored Henry Tudor, but the ever-prudent Richard had taken Thomas Stanley's son hostage. He was assured of the Stanleys' cooperation. At Bosworth Field, on August 22nd, the vanguard of Henry and Richard's armies clashed at dawn. Richard's superior numbers seemed certain to carry the day, but Henry's foot soldiers repelled their first charge. Richard's side suffered heavy losses, including their battle commander, the Duke of Norfolk. At the height of the struggle, Henry, with a 50-man escort, raced toward the Stanley army to entreat them to join his fight against the king. Richard saw his chance to end the Lancaster rivalry once and for all. He charged down on Henry with 900 soldiers. Finally, the Stanleys chose sides. 3,000 men came to Henry Tudor's aid. In the fray, the king himself killed unknown numbers, including Sir William Brandon, Henry's standard-bearer. When the fighting was over by 10 a.m., 900 lay dead. Among them, Richard III. At a place now called Crown Hill, Henry Tudor stripped Richard's corpse of the crown of England. Lord Thomas Stanley proclaimed him king. Thus the powerful Tudor dynasty was born and would keep the throne for more than a century. According to many accounts, Richard's body was unceremoniously dumped into a river, there perhaps to pass by the mighty castle that could no longer protect him. In fact, Richard was buried without honors at the Church of the Grey Friars in Leicester. Warwick remained in the crown's possession for 100 years more, until King Edward VI granted the castle and title to John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. A century later, all the castle's defenses were put to the test when the English Civil War broke out. For 2 weeks, cannon fire tore at Warwick's ramparts, leaving scars that remain today. Eventually, the Royalists withdrew, and the castle was saved. Many other mighty fortresses weren't so lucky. This is the ruin of nearby Kenilworth Castle. Like Warwick, Kenilworth was founded by William the Conqueror. During the Civil War, parliamentarians seized the castle. Fearing that the mighty fortress would later be wielded against them, they chose to disable it. With gunpowder, they blew up the outer wall of the keep, then demolished most of the structures within. More than once in its history, Warwick could have suffered this fate. But the castle had the good fortune to survive, mostly by virtue of the intimidating visage it presented to would-be attackers. Today, Warwick is owned by Madame Tussauds of London. It's threatened now only by friendly armies of tourists. Like an old soldier, it regales them with tales of medieval grandeur and helps them relive, for a moment, its fighting past. In a Scottish valley of sloping meadows and wild woods, where pagan magic met Christian canon, there stands a royal castle filled with ghostly secrets and tragic tales. Here are legends to inspire Shakespeare, where medieval and Victorian worlds collide in a dazzling display of history. Tour these haunted halls of mystery. Glamis Castle, on the next Great Castles of Europe. Some 1,200 years ago, a lone missionary crossed the rich red soil of the Scottish valleys. His name was Fergus, come from Ireland, the land of St. Patrick. Much about this holy wanderer is lost in the dim record of ancient history, but this much is known. Fergus took his Christian teachings through this land, where he encountered people of a pagan kingdom. We call them the Picts, Latin for the painters. They were one of the most powerful groups to settle Scotland. Memorial stones and crosses mark their existence and reveal their Celtic roots. Striking examples of Pictish relics are found in the village of Glamis. Most notable is the man's standing stone, whose entwined creatures may represent a family emblem or the meeting of Christianity and pagan tradition. Fergus's journey ended here, at the border of the Glamis Burn, part of a gentle, fertile valley of Strathmore, a prosperous holding of the Pictish kingdom. The year was 710 AD. Here, the missionary's message was well received. He soon founded a church, and word spread of his teachings. The ranks of the converted quickly swelled. Legend says Fergus, who would one day be sainted, baptized many at a site along the river. A well placed there was named for him. Glamis would, for a time, be a place of pilgrimage. As the centuries passed, Christianity took hold here and across Scotland. At Glamis, the pilgrimages ended. As a holy place, its time had passed. But as a playground for kings, it was just beginning. Glamis' rich woodlands and gentle glens were full of deer and wild boar. For Scottish monarchs, it proved an irresistible hunting ground. Thus begins the history of Glamis Castle. Its humble start was as an 11th century hunting lodge, made simply of earth and timber. As the centuries passed, the simple structure would acquire an architectural complexity and a ghoulish reputation. Indeed, Glamis would become a genuine haunted castle, a birthplace of ghost stories, and a stage for real-life tales of murder and betrayal. Here, William Shakespeare found the characters and the setting for his tale of ruthless ambition, the tragedy Macbeth. The castle resonates with the history of Macbeth. Legend says his grandfather, Malcolm, an 11th century Scottish king, was murdered here. In truth, King Malcolm did die at Glamis, but probably from wounds sustained while hunting deer. In Shakespeare's tragedy, Macbeth slew his first cousin, King Duncan, to seize the Scottish crown. Here, the supposed scene of that crime, King Duncan's Hall, named for the grisly event. History, however, tells us a different story. Macbeth did kill his cousin, but miles away from Glamis Castle, and under circumstances more honorable than those portrayed by Shakespeare. The real Macbeth and King Duncan met on the field of battle near Elgin in the year 1040. They broke away from the others to begin a duel to the death. Macbeth not only wanted Duncan's crown, he also wanted vengeance. Years before, Duncan's grandfather had murdered Macbeth's brother-in-law. The blood feud ran deep. It ran deeper still with the death of Duncan. Such were the days of a turbulent young Scotland when no slight between noble families went unpunished. Clan hostilities persisted for centuries. After killing Duncan, MacBeth in turn met his end at the hands of Duncan's son in the year 1057. MacBeth is buried here on the Isle of Iona in a graveyard richly planted with Scottish monarchs. He shares his resting place with King Robert II. It was Robert who placed Glamis Castle in private hands by granting it to Sir John Lyon in 1372. Four years later, Sir John fortified his good graces with the king by marrying his daughter, Joanna. The Lyon family would play prominently throughout royal Scottish history and live in Glamis Castle to its present day. In its early years as a family home, Glamis wasn't much to look at. But during the 15th century, the Lyons added the castle's centerpiece, the Great Tower, one of the oldest parts of Glamis still standing. Construction on the Great Tower began in 1435 and took about 50 years to complete. The tower's main hall, called the crypt, offers a taste of castle life during the Middle Ages. The air is chill and damp, the stone cold, even during the summer. Yet here the Lyon family spent most of their time. The crypt has remained largely untouched since the 15th century. This magnificent spiral staircase that leads from the crypt to the roof is a more modern addition, built 300 years later. It includes a rather primitive version of central heating. Vents were used to transport excess heat from the kitchen to other parts of the tower. For a time, life treated the Lyon family generously. They amassed great wealth and power. But tragedy soon stained the castle walls. The tragedy produced a ghost called the Grey Lady. Her tormented soul and the memory of a terrible deed haunt Glamis Castle to this day. The Grey Lady is said to be the ghost of Lady Glamis, who died in 1540. She was brutally killed, the target of an unchecked hatred by an obsessed Scottish king, King James V. James was the last of the Catholic Scottish kings and a leader in Scotland's struggle for independence against England. But he was also a bitter, lonely soul. Frequently, James eased his alienation by escaping to the woods, dressed in disguise to seek the company of gypsies and tramps. His habits earned him the nickname King of Commons. There, among his poorer subjects, James often sought solace in the arms of a woman. But sympathy for the monarch comes hard in light of his cruelty. The full force of his vindictive nature fell on the Scottish clan Douglas, the clan to which his much abhorred stepfather belonged. So deep was his hatred of his stepfather that James vowed to cleanse Scotland of the Douglas name. The castle at that time was in the hands of Lady Glamis, widow of the 6th Lord of Glamis. Her former name was Janet Douglas, a member of the Douglas clan. James charged Lady Glamis with witchcraft, and she was condemned to burn at the stake. The Scots were shocked and dismayed at what had befallen this much admired woman. It's said that all those present at the hideous scene of her death bowed their heads in shame. Heaping insult upon injury, James moved into Glamis Castle and appropriated its belongings. The king would live here for 4 years. But James's boundless cruelty eventually alienated his nobles and his armies. The rest of the king's reign was a chronicle of failure. His forces turned mutinous, and he was soundly defeated trying to invade England. James died shortly thereafter. At Glamis, his coat of arms still rests above the front door. After James's death, steps were taken to redress the injustices rendered during his reign. Lady Glamis was posthumously proved innocent of witchcraft, and the Glamis estate restored to the Lyon family. In a final act of reconciliation, James's teenage daughter visited Glamis Castle in 1562. Her name was Mary, Queen of Scots. The visit restored the bond between the Lyon family and the Scottish monarchy, and Mary strengthened a weak link among her nobles. She needed their support to stay balanced between Scotland's factious Protestants and Catholics. Glamis' present-day look is largely due to the efforts of Patrick, the third Earl of Strathmore and Kinghorn. Building on work begun by his grandfather, Patrick gave the castle a 17th century facelift and initiated a number of ambitious constructions. But Patrick had also inherited a host of problems. A castle sorely in need of repairs, and a debt of £400,000. Patrick's father had squandered the family fortune by financing part of Scotland's bishop wars. But Patrick, whose business acumen belies his rather whimsical way of dress, restored both the family fortune and the castle. He shored up his finances in part by acquiring capital, or cattle. Cattle breeding was a revolutionary idea at Glamis, but one that proved quite lucrative. These cash cows eventually bankrolled the castle's reconstruction. Patrick's remodeling campaign filtered into every crevice of the castle. Among his numerous additions and alterations, Patrick raised the central tower to new heights. And built the avenue that leads to the front door. When Patrick was finished, the castle displayed a unique blend of Scottish and French sensibilities, a melange of Norman-inspired turrets surrounding the classic Scottish tower house. But despite the charm and aesthetic appeal of Glamis, Patrick took an unassuming, even apologetic approach to his marvelous reconstruction efforts. In his diary, he expressed remorse for not seeking the counsel of a true architect and offered repeated apologies if his own architectural vision had gone awry in any way. But that is a part of the delight of Glamis, that it is a castle with real soul, a reflection of one man's sensitivities and quirks. Small flourishes, such as this wonderful Baroque sundial, celebrate his spirit and style. In that sense, Glamis has an organic quality, the result of which is pure Patrick. Inside the castle, Patrick created a real home. This was his favorite place, what he called the Great Hall. Today, it's the drawing room. Its arched ceiling of glorious plasterwork frames the third Earl's family portrait. Patrick, seated in the center, is surrounded by his sons. Shown here at a later age, Patrick was a devoted family man who preferred home life to the world of politics. He adored his wife, Helen Middleton, of whom he wrote, "To have her in marriage, I thank God, has been very successful." On their wedding day, Patrick presented his cherished Helen with this magnificent cabinet. He surprised her with a key to its doors. Bits of Patrick's legacy are scattered throughout the castle, including King Malcolm's room. His wife Helen embroidered these wall hangings. Done in pettipoint design, they were originally used for a four-poster bed, A close inspection reveals intricate floral patterns and other motifs worked straight into the linen. At the end of his life, the Earl of Strathmore and Kinghorn saw his work finished. He had transformed Glamis from a debt-ridden structure into one of the richest estates in Scotland. The newfound wealth allowed the Lyon family to enter one of the most turbulent chapters in Scottish and English history, the Jacobite Rebellion. It was an uprising that centered on who held the right to be King of England and Scotland. James II, the original king, had been forced into exile following the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Those who supported James and his descendants were called the Jacobites. They wanted to restore the Stuarts to the throne and launched a guerrilla campaign that would last for 60 years.
Right, leave it, come on! Get out of here, mate!
The Lyon family sided with the Jacobites and paid dearly for it. John, the 5th Earl, was killed in battle in 1715. At one point, Glamis Castle played host to Prince James III, the new symbol of the Jacobite rebellion, following his father's death in exile. But in the end, the Jacobite movement proved unsuccessful. Ending in the definitive Battle of Culloden in 1745, its political character soon replaced with harmless sentiment. Any traces of ill will toward England soon vanished from Glamis, when an important marriage followed that established bloodlines between the Scottish Lyon family and England. In 1767, John Lyon, the 9th Earl of Strathmore, married an Englishwoman of great stature, Mary Bowes. Above the fireplace in the drawing room, the entwined thistles of Scotland and the roses of England symbolize the union between two countries and two families. Life at the castle continued to prosper. In time, the family took the name of Bowes Lyon and acquired a seat in the House of Lords. Stepping into the modern world, the Bowes Lyon family represented all that was prominent and proper, the archetype of British aristocracy, 100 years away from its revolutionary past. But the crowning glory arrived in the 20th century, when a family member entered the realm of English royalty. On a wall in the dining room, a portrait reveals part of this royal connection. The woman seated is Countess Nina Cecilia Cavendish Bentinck. She came to live at Glamis after marrying the 14th Earl of Strathmore. One day she would be a famous grandmother, her granddaughter, a certain Queen of England. The Countess's bedroom, just as it looked at the turn of the century. This was her canopy bed. On the bed's pelment, she hand-embroidered the letters C. C for Cecilia and C for her husband, Claude, followed by the names and dates of birth of her 10 children. Her youngest, Elizabeth. What became of Elizabeth, this lovely woman who held a certain twinkle in her eye? She eventually married, had children, and became the Queen Mother. Glamis, in fact, is the Queen Mother's childhood home. This Italian garden, her playground. In the billiard room, among the glorious and rare tapestries, a teenage Elizabeth nursed wounded soldiers during World War I. The room had been temporarily converted into a hospital ward. This was the Queen Mother's private suite after she married. And it was in this part of the castle that she gave birth to Princess Margaret. The first time in 300 years, a royal baby in line for the English throne was born in Scotland. But amid the celebrated joys and triumphs of Glamis, an eerie air still cloaks the castle. Stories heard here hint of dark secrets of the past. Many spring from a secret chamber thought to lie deep within the bowels of the crypt. One legend says this chamber is the home of a vampire, the unfortunate product of a family curse. The vampire pops up periodically in the family and hangs about for a few centuries, requiring a lengthy imprisonment behind this wall. Another version has a family member of limited repute playing cards in the chamber on the Sabbath, his partner, the devil himself. Together they made such a racket the room was finally covered and sealed. The only clue to the chamber's existence, an outside window, covered up and barred over. Other visitors from the netherworld are said to walk the castle halls, peer out of windows, and trip the unwitting visitor. The castle's forbidding feel has provoked unease in not a few guests. A celebrated visitor, Sir Walter Scott, was prompted to write that while at Glamis he felt himself too far from the living and somewhat too near the dead. Ireland, land of 1,000 kings. Here, Celt monarchs presided over a golden age of culture, only to fall victim to England's mightiest weapon, the castle. From the crucible of war, Bunratty Castle emerged as a towering symbol of colonial power. Relive the conquest of a nation through the history of the fighting fortress Bunratty, next on Great Castles of Europe. Ireland after the time of Christ was a wild, fertile hinterland with a destiny all its own. Rome's conquering legions never set foot on its shores. So while Europe bent under the weight of Roman administration, Ireland's Celts studied nature's law. As interpreted by Celt priests and lawgivers, nature called for sacrifice and ritual, fealty to the order of creation. Its cycles were sacred. Life and death worked in balance. Cattle were nature's gift, the source of food and clothing. Those who owned the most cattle were the earth's chosen kings. Ireland boasted 150 kings. To guard their cattle, they erected circular homesteads of stone and wood. Though largely nomadic, their kin groups found refuge in these ring forts during harsh seasons. With forts, they staked their claim to pasture land, shared among the kin. The simple Celt fortress consisted of a lumber palisade on a stone foundation. Inside the spacious courtyard were living quarters, granaries, even nurseries for the youngest kin. There were special places for the seasonal tasks of husking and winnowing. The Celts forged iron tools capable of great precision and artistry. Wolves posed a constant threat. So did rival clans. The ring fort Cahir Ballyconarga dispels the notion that pre-Christian Celts were bucolic, peace-loving farmers. Whatever clan built it lived in constant fear for their lives. The ring fort's first line of defense is a surrounding field of sharp limestone pillars, mostly hidden in tall grass. These made mass attack by foot soldiers difficult. On horseback, impossible. As raiders approached, they'd come under a hail of stones, arrows, and spears, hobbled all the while by the sharp pillars. Aggressors who made it to the fort were confronted by double stone walls, which were once crowned by a sharp wooden palisade. At this obstacle, attackers might be willing to consider a siege or pick an easier target. For the Celts, embracing nature's cycle of life meant making provisions for death, a tradition in Ireland dating back to the Stone Age. The Polna Bron Portal Dolmen once held the bones of 16 children and adults. The Celts incorporated these haunting Stone Age structures into their own system of beliefs. They honored the spirits present in all of nature's manifestations. Trees, rocks, and water were especially sacred. In the 5th century, sacred belief in Ireland underwent monumental change. The high crosses at Kilfenora Cathedral show how the natural shapes of Celtic art came to decorate towering stone crucifixes. Christianity, brought from England by St. Patrick, instantly appealed to the islanders' affinity for kings. Ireland's church centered around independent monasteries, which became great centers of scholarship and art. They produced some of the Middle Age's finest works, like the Book of Kells, an illuminated manuscript of the 4 Gospels. While Europe languished in the dark ages of the 7th and 8th centuries, Ireland enjoyed its golden age. Europe wouldn't experience anything like it for another 800 years. Ireland's golden age ended in the late 8th century when Scandinavian Vikings began bloody raids on the island. For the first time in 1,000 years, Ireland was attacked by outsiders. Her kingdoms were slow to organize resistance against the Viking onslaught. Divided, the kingdoms fell, losing their women, their herds, their lives. In the 11th century, the Irish King of Munster distinguished himself through fearless attacks on the invaders. His name was Brian Boru. Raising an army, he met the Vikings head-on at Clontarf on Good Friday in 1014. There, Brian Boru died, but the power of the invaders was crushed. His victory was perhaps the last time Ireland would unify against outside forces. Norman armies struck only 100 years after the Vikings were defeated. In their conquest of England, the Normans had forged the decisive military weapon of its age, the castle. England's King Henry II boasted the largest military in Europe since the days of the Roman Empire. In the 12th century, he unleashed this force on Ireland. As queen of the Norman strategy, the castle reigned supreme. In Munster province, Bunratty is the most magnificent of these castles. Castles were fiercely challenged centers from which the king's barons guarded territory and made raids to conquer more. Bunratty Castle dominates an estuary at the confluence of the Great Shannon River and the smaller river Ratty. In the Celt tongue, Bunratty itself means mouth of the Ratty. Thomas de Clare, a Norman nobleman, erected the first stone castle here in the 13th century on the site of an older wooden fort. The king granted de Clare the site while encouraging the baron to take all the land he could conquer in Munster. De Clare and his soldiers did just that, driving out the native Celt inhabitants. England's colonization of Ireland had begun. Of course, the North Munster clans responded with furious resistance. The two most powerful clans were the O'Briens, descendants of the High King Brian Boru, and the McNamaras. In daring nighttime raids, they made repeated attacks on fortified Bunratty Castle. Critically, however, the two clans failed to unite their armies against the Norman de Clare. The O'Briens even had trouble within their own ranks. In 1277, Brian Ruadh O'Brien believed that he'd been cheated out of the kingship of Thomond. Foolishly, he came to de Clare for help. The baron received him as a guest of honor at Bunratty and held a grand feast in his honor. It was the last meal of a condemned man. Brian Ruadh O'Brien's appalling fate is recorded in the ancient annals of Loch Key. After they had poured their blood into the same vessel, and after they had pledged Christ's friendship, and after they had exchanged mutual vows by the relics, bells, and croziers of Munster, de Clare had Brian Ruadh taken outside and torn asunder by horses, his head cut off, and his body gibbeted to a tall post outside the castle of Bunratty. The O'Briens' reprisal was devastating. In 1280, all the clan's armies attacked Bunratty and besieged the castle for so long that the residents and surrounding town were unable to bury their dead. An epidemic raged for months. In 1318, the Irish finally won control of Bunratty by killing Thomas de Clare's son. Before leaving for England with ships docked nearby, his bitter wife set fire to Bunratty and the surrounding town. According to the annals of Loch Key, what she left behind wasn't worth plundering. Bunratty was deserted, empty, wrapped in fire, from which time to this, never one of the breed of De Clare has come back to claim it. Following the De Clares' dramatic exit, Bunratty changed hands between the warring McNamaras and O'Briens. In the struggle, the castle burned several times. Yet each time, the region's most highly prized military resource rose from the ashes to be wielded by clan chiefs. With it, they enforced their authority as father of the clan. In the early 1500s, Murrough O'Brien was one such chief. As the head of the O'Briens, he was clan landlord, councillor, and judge. He settled disputes, negotiated marriages, and meted out punishment as he saw fit. His leadership was the linchpin of Munster's Celt society. Bunratty was its enforcer. As a jailhouse, the castle's dungeon made a lasting impression on wrongdoers. More than 15 feet deep, the pit has no access except by rope from above. Intimidating Bunratty was in every way Munster Province's ultimate treasure, power incarnate. But in the early 16th century, the nature of power was about to change. In 1508, Henry VIII became King of England. By the time he was dubbed King of the Irish colony some years later, his navy was a virtually unbeatable, far-reaching force, especially frightening to regions near the sea, like Limerick and Bunratty Castle. To the Celt chiefs in his zone of power, Henry offered a devil's bargain, a policy called surrender and re-grant. In exchange for peace, Henry would give Irish chieftains a grant of land and a title. Murrough O'Brien, the 57th King of Thomond, accepted this deal. With this act, the Irish king became the first Earl of Thomond. The implications for the clan were staggering. Their ancestral territory became royal land. Clan leaders' authority was cut out from under them. The Celt kingdom was reduced to serfdom under the crown. As part of the deal, the Earl also consented to raise his son as a Protestant. Twice damned in the eyes of his kin, Murrough O'Brien lived out his life in Munster as a pariah. Now the reviled O'Brien, and later his heirs, lived in open war with their kinsmen, clan leaders who had not surrendered their legacy. These Celt kings chose to fight against the overwhelming forces of the crown. Their defensive strongholds were a special kind of ring fort called a crannog, basically a fort built on a man-made island. The crannog survived side by side with castles until the 16th century. Then the Celts' history as an independent people came to an end. Henry VIII hastened their final chapter with a tragic drama enacted throughout Ireland. In 1541, the English king decided that Celts living in cottages would be easier to control than those holed up in ring forts and crannogs like this. He ordered the forts destroyed, the people driven into the fields. Against the cannons of the English war machine, the Irish kings were helpless. With real power in the hands of the remote empire, even Bunratty's significance fell. It was no longer necessary to intimidate. A united Irish and English aristocracy kept the clans in check. The O'Brien Earls, like the 4th Earl Donogh, were emissaries of the British Empire. They were no longer fighters, but administrators. Bunratty continued to serve the crown, but now as a lavish center of hospitality. Donogh added top rooms in the southern towers and inserted stained glass in many windows. The widely traveled Earl brought back much of this finery from Renaissance-era France. There he found the inspiration for the flowers and plants adorning the ceiling's stucco work. By the 1700s, Bunratty's transformation from a crude fort to a resplendent Renaissance palace was complete. Yet Celtic traces remain. This is Sheila na gig, an ancient fertility symbol. In the social swirl of castle life, courtiers now replaced soldiers. In place of war parties, the earls held banquets. Surrounding them at all times were attendants and administrators, hangers-on, anxious to press business. Marshals, stewards, pages, footboys, the list numbered in the hundreds. In 1646, the Pope's nuncio, Cardinal Rinuccini, paid a visit to the 6th Earl, Barnaby. He wrote, "I have no hesitation in asserting that Bunratty is the most beautiful spot I have ever seen. In Italy, there is nothing like the palace and grounds of Lord Thomond, nothing like its ponds and parks and its 3,000 head of deer." High praise indeed. Yet the 6th Earl built up the castle's defenses, guessing, perhaps, that Munster's tranquil era might end. He was right. In the middle of the 17th century, the English Civil War broke out between the Royalists, loyal to Charles I, and the Parliamentarians. Irish rebels laid siege outside Bunratty. Sir William Penn and his parliamentarian forces holed up within, grateful for the castle's defenses. After penetrating the outer wall, an infiltrating band would likely head for the basement door. A murder hole above it allowed defenders to pour hot oil or water on them. Entering one of the main doorways might have presented less of a challenge. Still, all the doors are narrow, and the staircases rise clockwise, giving defenders more sword room than attackers. For the children's protection, earlier O'Brien Earls had created child-sized staircases. Only the tiniest adult could follow. Ultimately, the Irish Confederates forced Sir William Penn's surrender. He gave up the castle to the rebels and set sail for Kinsale. Miraculously, when the smoke cleared, Bunratty's reigning Earl managed to retain ownership. Of the crafty 6th Earl, it was said, he succeeded in being royalist, rebel, and Roundhead at one and the same time, in full possession of his estates. The Royalists ultimately failed. Cromwell's reign as Lord Protector helped bring about the Protestant ascendancy that dominated the island for the next 3 centuries. Bunratty's fighting history was over. Its decline into ruin began. The last O'Brien Earl moved to a mansion. In a parting gesture of indifference, he caved Bunratty's roof in. In the colony, all roof dwellings were taxed. The castle lay abandoned for over a century. While colonialism's ultimate tool languished, the colonial era continued to bear bitter fruit.
With the powers that were granted to Patrick, I bank this fire. May the angels keep it, no enemy scatter it. Christ's sword on the door till tomorrow's light.
In the 19th century, Irish peasants subsisted mostly on potatoes. Meat, barley, and wheat were exported for English tables. When the potato crop suffered from blight in the 1840s, the impact was devastating. More than 1 million Irish succumbed to disease and death by starvation. As the 20th century began, it looked as if Bunratty, like dozens of other Irish castles, would remain a ruin forever. But in 1945, it became the prized possession of one more strong master. Lord Gort, the 7th Viscount Gort, bought Bunratty for £2,000 and restored the fighting fortress to the style of its most magnificent era. The regal South Solar, featuring an elaborate Tudor ceiling, served as the family's private apartments. Most of its furnishings are from the 16th and 17th centuries. The Lord and Lady were originally from Northern Ireland and kept homes in England as well as Canada. When Bunratty's restoration was finished in the 1960s, the Gorts gave the castle to the people of Ireland. Today, visitors can enjoy the majestic Great Hall, restored to the spare elegance of the daring age of the O'Brien Earls. Bunratty Castle hosts thousands of tourists each year, reminding them of that bygone era of clan chiefs and kings, empires conquered and lost again. It shows one of history's most daunting faces of power in the heroic land of 1,000 kings.